We're all clear? Very good. Councillor Milne. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. First question I'd like to ask the chair of the committee, was there a staff report regarding this resolution? Turn your mic off.
No, there was not, Councillor Milne.
If I may continue, Mr. Warden. The resolution may well be the resolution we want to support, but I can't in good conscience support that resolution without a staff report showing the impact on our budget going forward, the impact on our staffing resources, and the impact on the infrastructure. I have no idea whether that's the right thing to do. It may well be, but I think in good conscience, to show that we've done our due diligence to all of the taxpayers of Grey County, we need to see what the impacts of that resolution are going to be. And some will say, well, of course, we're going to apply for the beds and sort that out later. Well, I don't think that's fair, both to our staff or the provincial staff for that matter. If I'm a provincial employee looking at applications, I need to know that the application, or the applicant rather, in this case Grey County, has done their work and truly does have the resources and the wherewithal to put these beds into play and to do the job right. Just to say that we're going to apply and figure it out later, that's like saying, well, I'm going to order a new truck, but I'll decide when it arrives whether I'm going to pay for it or not. I think we need to have a lot more information in front of us as a council to show that we've done our due diligence as a council to the ratepayers of Grey County. So, in that respect, I would like to move that we defer this resolution until we get a staff report outlining the things that I just mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
You're welcome. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. As a member of the Long-Term Care Committee, we acted on a resolution that was passed by this council back in January that we apply for an additional or more than 90 beds. So we applied as a committee, we discussed it, and we brought forth the motion for 96 beds based on multiples of 32, and that was just following the direction of this council. We do not know, I agree with Mr. Millen, we do not know what the right number is, but the application window started on October 1st and goes through till January. So we don't have a lot of time. We've been asking for a number of months what the right number would be, and we've had some staffing turnover. There's been a difficult time getting those numbers back to us. We do need those numbers, I agree with that, but I don't think it hurts to make the application. It gives us the ability then up the road to determine what that right number is. But I would hate to see us lose the opportunity for additional beds in Grey County. Thank you.
Councillor McQueen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden and County Council. Back on January 24th, 2019, the Committee of the Whole passed a resolution, CW 2719, directing staff to apply to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care for a minimum of 90 additional long-term care beds, and that the Committee of Management would determine the optimal efficiency, financial impact, and equity of the allocation of these beds should they be approved. So the direction back in January was to apply. That same direction has not been changed. I introduced the idea of a notice of motion 2 meetings ago, and I was told from staff that if I was to change that, then I'd have to reintroduce that whole motion. That motion is still on the books, and as we know, I think it's October 2nd, when the announcement from the provincial government came out saying now we can apply. And we've always been told around this table that the application process wasn't in place. October 2nd, the application process became in place. So to you, Mr. Warden and County Council, now we're following the direction of the motion, which I've been asking follow-up since January 24th, 2019. So we are following the direction that has been approved by this County Council.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Soever.
Yes, and following up on Councillor McQueen's comments, he's quite right that we endorsed that in February 14th, 2019, and it was directed that the Committee of Management would determine the optimal efficiency, financial impact, and equity of allocation of these beds. I just find it strange that with all the staff and people we have working on this, that we haven't been able to get a number, you know, at least an indicative scoping type number of the financial impact at this time. I mean, I'd like to know that too, and I know Councillor McQueen has brought this up many times to some councillors' displeasure, but he keeps bringing this up every month. Where are we with this? And now we're sitting here saying, well, we need to know the things that we asked to know in February. And, you know, I think there is a short window, but it appears that, you know, we've dragged our feet on finding out these other things, and now we're in a difficult situation. And I just think that, you know, when we pass a motion, we should move on it and get that information that was requested in February.
Councillor Robertson, I'll come to you next, but CAO would like to make some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Two things. As far as understanding the impact of additional beds for Rockwood Terrace, which is something that's happened this year, and since that original motion was passed by council last February, we were awarded the additional beds for Rockwood Terrace. We have, from 2018, the assessment undertaken by Sienna of the impact of the additional 28 beds at Rockwood Terrace. I believe that that information played a part in those beds being awarded to us, even though we were somewhat outside of the redevelopment application window. So we have a sense, and I shared that information with all of you during our strategic planning session last week. I also, and this is included in the minutes from the strategic planning session last week, I also provided some information, the best information that we have with regard to additional beds for Grey Gables. The fact that we would be looking for 96 beds at Grey Gables, I mean, it's only been now in the last couple of weeks that that's even been an option for us to consider. So to suggest that we might have provided information about 96 beds, that number of beds has never been, or anything close to it, has never been discussed around this table. Certainly, we have had conversations about adding a fourth wing or an additional 32 beds. What I tried to do during the strategic planning session was give council some idea of what those additional beds would look like and what the impact of both projects, both redevelopment projects, would look like. If we were going to add 124 new beds to two facilities, we would be looking at an investment in excess of $25 million. And that levy impact, and these are very, very rough numbers, but we know that the levy impact of that would be somewhere in excess of $1.1 million every single year. So I think there's a tremendous amount of work to do, And none of this work is particularly simple. None of us around the table are architects or construction engineers. And, you know, in an effort to be as efficient and effective as possible, where I can have clear direction to seek that outside expertise and provide information to us, then I can do that. If council would like to have a more detailed assessment of what a 96-bed redevelopment would look like at Grey Gables, then we can certainly try our very best to get the right resources around the table as quickly as possible to pull together some numbers. This is as much about a site plan and the architecture of the existing facility there as it is about a numbers situation. So there's some real work that would go into considering how do you deal with things on that site like drainage, like parking, redeveloping the kitchen and the laundry facility there while still maintaining an operating facility. All of those considerations have to come into play here for us to really understand what the impacts would be and what a project would look like. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you. We have a number of building blocks before us. We certainly have the council resolution that has been on the books since January of this year. We have the recommendation from the Long-Term Care Committee of Management suggesting that we move ahead with the application process, and also that the provincial application process is open since October with a deadline of January. So with this in mind, we absolutely have to move ahead. We have the Rockwood Terrace announcement where the redevelopment of 100 beds and the new 28 new beds is before us, and we've got that plan before us that we need to do a detailed design and build with regard to that that project, and we need to move ahead rather quickly on that. Certainly it's of an important and priority within Grey County. But we also have Rockwood Terrace, or rather Grey Gables, that we need to pay attention to. And I'm wondering if there, so I'm supportive of the application for new beds. I need to make that loud and clear that I support the application for Grey Gables to have additional beds. But I'm looking for a resolution of whether, or mitigation to this issue, and is it possible at our long-term care meeting of November 12th, we would have the information, and certainly our CAO has provided information through our strategic planning session, but can we get concrete numbers at our November 12th meeting and enough information that our long-term care committee can discuss at that November meeting, and then bring forward more information at the November 28th council meeting, and have the data that Councillor Milne is suggesting, and the data that we all need, but we're not impeding the process that far. It's just a resolution. I absolutely need to make it clear that I do support the need to move ahead with the request for beds, but can we get that data as quickly as I've outlined?
Kim?
Because I feel strongly that some outside expertise would be very valuable to this, I just would want to make sure that there was complete accuracy in the information that was being provided to this council. Getting that expertise and getting the work done in that short of a period of time might be very tight. I think for us to suggest that we brought it back to all of council in on November 28th, I think would be likely a more reasonable timeline. And I would go on to say that I wouldn't be thinking that this would be impeding our ability to put an application in, because I think the work that goes into this would be if the decision is to proceed, the work that goes into this assessment would be very valuable to have for a future application. Sorry.
Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Just in regards to numbers, based on what our CAO just said, $1.1 million levy increase, that equates to 53 cents per household per week. So that's the levy impact, 53 cents per week per household. So who's not willing to spend 53 cents a week for quality, equitable, long-term care? Thank you.
Councillor Burley.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. At the committee level, when we started this discussion, the CAO did point out to us that we finally have applications now that we can apply for more beds. That was always a stumbling block at the time. The committee discussed what would be the best way of setting Grey Gables up, in our opinion. We all agreed that if there's going to be more beds to Grey Gables, it should follow the 128 pod that seems to be working for Rockwood. So really, all we really needed was 62 more beds to make that pod come to 128. Having County Council have passed a motion, which we referred to here today, of 90+ beds, the committee had to follow the direction of County Council, which was to apply for 90+ beds. So the committee members come up with a motion to apply for 96 beds. And the motion was passed. I did ask the question at the end of the meeting, what is that actually going to be a cost to the county? And that was a real concern. I still have that concern. The other concern I have with it, first of all, I do agree with Councillor Milne that we definitely need some staff reports coming back here reasonably soon. I agree concerns out of Grey Gables footprint. With a new hospital that's going to be eventually built on site, the amount of real estate they'd need, footprint for that new hospital, is there enough room left to put any sizable addition on Grey Gables? That's a question we need to answer. I understand it's going to take a lot of room to not only build a hospital, but for future growth for that new hospital. So that's a concern we have to follow through. Staff reports are extremely important. These reports should not be rushed. We need accurate information to base our decision. And I really feel that that's important to get that and go from there.
Thank you. I would just ask people in the audience, I know that you have opinions and you have beliefs, and it's a passionate issue for sure, but I would just ask you to keep your comments quiet while council has their deliberations. Councillor McQueen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden. I got a number of points I'd like to make here. I guess in the sense of process, we passed this motion back in January, and we were told that there's a new application process coming. It's coming. I don't understand why we weren't moving forward with getting that report, because we knew it was coming. We were told it was coming. I'll park that for now. This is once in a lifetime opportunity to get more beds for Grey County. Who is not going to want to support more senior opportunities for long-term care? Certainly, as we went through the process back in 2017 with the option of selling one of the homes or moving one of the homes, we were told then that, well, the province has never offered up new beds. Never offered new beds. Well, they are offering new beds, and we have seen that now for the last year or so. I think it's time that we need to invest in our senior population. As we know, Grey County is higher than the average as far as senior population in the province of Ontario. I think it's over 25% or over 65 here in Grey County, and we know it's going to grow. and we know the aging baby boomers that's coming. The other part I want to bring is back in 2017, there was a report by Sienna that said we could move those 100 beds from Rockwood to Grey Gables. We know that there is the base of putting 100 new beds onto Grey Gables. We got that report from Sienna, a reputable firm. And fortunately, this council in January made the decision to keep both homes. And it's great news that Rockwood is moving forward with the 28 new beds for the rebuild there. But we have that report, I think it's somewhere around March of 2017, that says Grey Gables can handle 100 new beds. It's in that report. Pull it off the shelf. Also, back in January, that previous motion before the one about applying for 90 new beds was a motion to rescind the motion of May of 2017 to dispose of Grey Gables, and that decision was reversed, and it was decided that we were going to keep Grey Gables, Mr. Warden and County Council. But from that discussion around the table, it was certainly talked about that we need to add more beds to Grey Gables to add to the efficiencies of that facility, as we had seen, have seen with Rockwood by bringing it up to 28 from the 100, which we got that report, I think, somewhere around May of 2018. And I remember that time when we talked about adding 28 new beds to the 100 of that application process. That happened lickety split, pretty quick, I think within less than a month. So I think we have the ability to certainly draw on those previous resources that are already have some of that, a lot of that information in place. Going back to Councillor Mellon, you know, we've all gone through, most of us probably gone through buying a property. But you wouldn't probably go buy a property if you needed a mortgage. But you'd want to make sure you had approval from the bank or wherever your lending institution that you're borrowing the money from, that you had approval to get the money before you go out and buy. This process here is seeing that we can get the approval before we go and make the big investment, or maybe the investment of going through all that work to determine what that right number is. I think the opportunity, and it's a short window, we know it's the 17th of January, and I apologize, Councillor Mackey, it was October 1st, but certainly we have a very short window here. We know throughout the County of Grey, a few weeks back, when the Minister of Long-Term Care was here, Minister Fullerton, announcing new beds for Hanover, new beds for Owen Sound, new beds for Durham, Rockwood, and new beds for Meaford. And we're all pleased that's happened. I think every area in those communities they know that there's a reason why we need to add more beds. So we supported that. I think that's a great, I think, Mr. Warden, you sent a letter of support for People's Care for Meaford from this council in support of that. So I think here we are at a turning point for the history of Grey County, is the opportunity is knocking for our seniors in Grey County, the opportunity to create opportunities for more long-term care, and not to be left out, as we do, and we have talked a little bit at our strategic planning session a week or so ago, about the opportunity of assisted living. Simcoe County, you're talking about cost, and we've talked a bit about this around this table. Simcoe County has a model where they also are in the assisted living business to offset or help support the cost of long-term care beds. I think we do need to, and I know Councillor Mackey has certainly talked about that a number of times, and I think we need to, I think the Long-Term Care Management Committee has offered an opportunity, or they're looking at an opportunity for a tour. So I think we have to have a very open-minded ideas of how we move forward for the next 20, 30, or 40 years. As far as the site for the new hospital, I don't know if it is available. I know I asked for a copy of the site plan from Randy when the warden was down and had a visit. We had that conversation, and thank you for coming down, Mr. Warden. But we talked about the site. And the site has already been determined where that hospital is. It's getting, and just as a side, I was at the foundation recognition for the Bruce Gray Health Unit, the Bruce Gray Owen Sound, I forget, the health services here for all the hospitals. They had their recognition event the other night last week, and certainly they're really close for that hospital, very close. Probably looking at finalizing with the province and maybe going out to tendering in the new year. So from that site plan, the site plan is determined. It's laid out where the new hospital is. In my opinion and other opinions that feel, if we were to be successful for 96 new beds, that could, you know, and we all know that the province has based their long-term care on pods of 32. So 32, 64, or 96 is those numbers that could be added to Grey Gables. But, you know, if we talk about that wing, so 32 could be 1 floor, 64 could be 2 floors, 96 could be 3 floors. So as your footprint goes, you limit your footprint, but you go up. And we know that's quite possible for doing that. And it's felt that there also could be opportunities for maybe assisted living on that site, depending on, I mean, you look at downtown Toronto, you look at urban centers, they know how to put stuff on spaces. And we have a lot more space than there are in locations in the urban setting. So if, you know, I'll leave it at that. If this county council has the will, there is the way. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Warden.
Thank you. Councillor O'Leary, I'm going to come to you, but I'll allow Kim to respond first. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. I think the comments from the CAO speak volumes and only solidify my support for the motion that's on the floor. Councillor Mackey's, in response to Councillor Mackey's numbers of 53 cents a household, you bring up a really good point. We are completely surrounded by senior homes that are making a profit. We lose over $6 million a year. So we should have, maybe when the numbers come back, how much this is costing us per household. It's a long ways from 53 cents. But before we make this decision, I'd like to have more information on numbers. Thank you. And I'd like a recorded vote if possible.
Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And just, if I may, just one small point of clarification for council. I believe the report that Councillor McQueen was referring to was from May 25th, 2017, and that was the long-term care review report. And to be clear, the task that our consultants were given at that time was a purely financial one. They were not asked to, nor did they undertake any kind of a detailed assessment from an infrastructure architecture perspective. What Sienna did was run the numbers, and they said, if, you know, all things being equal, what would make the most sense from a bottom line perspective financially. So that's what that report was about, but it did not get into any detail about the complexities of construction and architecture and site plan and that sort of thing. So I just want to be clear, we haven't been sitting on information and holding it back from you. That work has not yet been done, and I would appreciate the opportunity to try and delve into that for you. Thanks.
Thank you. So I see no other hands, so I think, oh, Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I can understand where Councillor Milne, Councillor Burley are coming from on the staff report and how it should not be rushed. At the same time, we have a very short window. Unfortunately, the province doesn't or cannot work on our timelines. We have to work with the province's timelines. I fail to understand why we cannot apply for the beds and then have a staff report to see what that looks like. I think Councillor McQueen had a very strong analogy on you do look for pre-approval on a mortgage before you go buy a house. I know I did that. I just bought a house last year. So I fail to understand why the two things cannot happen concurrently and why we're stuck on this point of we need a staff report and then apply for the bids.
Councillor Bartnicki.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I don't think these two parts are mutually exclusive. I think that there is a need for a staff report. We do need to know what we are committing the citizens of Grey County to for many years to come. But if we miss the window, we don't need that. If we get the report and miss the window, the report is useless. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they both need to happen. I do have one question, and that would be, if the application for the beds were to be approved, and then a future report came back and indicated that this council should not move forward, could we turn the beds back to the ministry? And if the answer to that is yes, I don't think we have anything to argue about.
I would confirm that with the province. Certainly the process that we've just been through with Rockwood Terrace was one where we were provided with a conditional approval and needed to provide an attestation back to the province that we were willing to accept the beds that had been conditionally awarded to us. I do not know whether or not the same holds true in this process because it's new, but I will talk to our program manager at the province and confirm that.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you. The window of opportunity is right now to apply for additional beds for Grey Gables. There is no argument there. I'm seconded the motion, the recommendation that came through the Long-Term Care Committee of Management to apply for the additional beds, for 96 beds in total on behalf of Grey County residents. That's before you as a consideration, and we do need to move ahead. When we looked at Rockwood Terrace, we had that motion before us, and we were waiting for the application process to be opened. But within that time, we maintained that we wanted the province to be aware that we were looking for those 28 beds, and we wanted the province to support us in that manner. And we provided correspondence and telephone conversations and dialogue with our MPP and others to ensure the maintenance and to ensure that Rockwood Terrace would be up for consideration for additional beds and in the queue. We need to do the same for Grey Gables. And I think the way to do that is to apply for the beds now. It's been discussed that we cannot get a report, a thorough report, and I get that, for our November meeting of long-term care. But there is no reason why we cannot apply for the beds so that the province is aware that we are supporting our Grey County residents and that we need the additional beds. The staff report can come forward and we can deal with this accordingly. And I would look to my fellow county councillors to look at this favorably. Thank you.
Councillor Soever.
Further to Councillor Bartnicki's comments, maybe we could also ask the province that if we do get the beds and for some reason we can't accept them, that we could turn them over to a private provider, because that would still give us the beds. No, we can't do that under the new process either.
They have always made it very clear to us that they consider beds awarded to the private sector versus municipal beds versus not-for-profit beds as very separate things. They track them differently, and they don't allow them to move between those sectors, unfortunately.
Oops. Councillor Body.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. Looking back, I know that this council has approved supporting private operators. You know, that private operators do the exact same thing that we do, except that they somehow profit. They get the same grants from the province. They get they can charge the same thing to the client. I'm looking at this, and it's interesting that Grey Gables is not mentioned in the original motion. It was optimal efficiency, financial impact, and equity of the allocation of these beds. It wasn't specifically. We discussed that at the time, Paul. I remember you standing up and saying, we need to apply for these beds and then figure out what we do with them. But clearly all the rhetoric and the poor choice of words maybe, and I don't mean that as being critical. Clearly the discussion in the community and certainly in the press is that these are all for Grey Gables, and I think we need to put our mind to that. Since that time, we've had 170 new beds come into Grey. When you include the 26 in Hanover that were in December of 2017, that's 196 new beds that are coming to Grey County. 168 of those, or 168 of the 196, are in private operation, and they're doing it at a profit, not at a cost to the taxpayer. My concern is if we apply and then say later, no, we decide not to go ahead, that the window will close for private applicants. I do know that, maybe I shouldn't say it that way, I speculate, but I'm confident that there is at least one more private operator that's looking to expand in Grey County. I assume that they would be applying during this window being open for their facility. If we took beds, and there's only so many beds to be given out, and then turned them back, would that take away the opportunity of a private company that's going to profit, not cost the taxpayers money, to provide beds in Grey County? I'm all in favor of providing more beds in Grey County, don't get me wrong. I think we need to know the cost to the taxpayer, especially in light of that there's private companies that are doing it at break even or better. We shouldn't, in a sense, be in competition with private companies that A, are paying taxes, B, providing jobs, all those things in our community. I want to know what the numbers are before we apply. Way back when, I did support the idea of adding beds, and at that point we were talking specifically about Grey Gables, trying to lower that approximately $16,000 cost per bed down to 11, which is more like across the street. You know, gee, should we be happy as it can be to only cost the taxpayers $11,000 per bed and add more? You know, 100 more beds, that's a lot of money. Or shouldn't we? But that's a decision that I think we need to make before we apply. Again, I support getting more beds. If we look at it and the numbers make sense for us, then I can see me supporting it. I can't speak for everybody here. But I think we need to know the numbers before we go forward, and I am concerned that if we apply, that we are harming the private companies in Grey County from applying to beds, that if we got them, they didn't, then what? Thanks.
Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Paul mentioned the discussion around should we keep Grey Gables, and I supported that resolution to keep Grey Gables as a county-run long-term care facility, and I still support that. My fundamental problem here is there's been a lot of opinions expressed here this morning, but there's nothing in front of me that says this is this, this is this, and this is this. We're being asked to make a decision that ultimately could cost our taxpayers, all of them, millions of dollars. And we have no hard facts or staff report in front of us. I don't make decisions that way, either here or in my private business. I think we need to think about that. Nobody here would suggest we don't support long-term care in the county, but there is nothing in front of us that'll outline how we're going to pay for this, even if we can do it physically on the site. Again, there's been lots of opinions, but nobody has shown me how we can do this. So I can't support the original motion, and I stand by my request to defer it until we get that information in front of us. And unless you've got that information as a councillor, you're not doing your job.
Okay. Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I feel that's an accusation, and I can't appreciate that. To say we're not doing our job is a grave accusation. Further, if I may continue speaking, Mr. Warden, I'm hearing a lot of comments around we're taking away from the private sector. Keeping that in mind, as a county, we are working on a transportation project, while there's taxi cab companies that are making a profit while being run privately. And so why is long-term care different? As I said before, and I can agree with Councillor Millen on requiring a staff report. What I cannot agree with on it not being concurrent with the application process. So, yeah, I would support the original motion, and I can't support deferring this, because we've been deferring this since, well, I shouldn't say deferring, that's the wrong word, but we've known that we were going to apply for beds at Grey Gables since January.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor. We have a mover, but so it's a motion to defer by Councillor Millen. I do not have a seconder, actually. So I have a seconder in Councillor Body. Okay, I think we've had our discussion. I don't see any other hands, so Councillor McQueen.
I'll probably speak loud enough anyway. A good comment about private and public long-term care beds. But I don't see anybody standing up on the east side of Grey County with private bed applications. We have a 60 bed operation in Thornbury. I don't know if they're looking at expanding. I think you have to take a really hard look at where the growth and where the future growth. Look at Flato and Southgate. We're in the process of tremendously growing in Markdale, and look at the growth that's continuing in the town of Blue Mountains. And I guess to you, Mr. Whoever, for the mayor of Blue Mountains, I forget how much, was it $800,000 worth of assessment, or whatever you found there just recently, whatever that number was. It continues to grow as we see. So, you know, if there was a private firm coming up to represent equity throughout the county, I think maybe we would be standing back. But this goes back to the part about making that decision and about the efficiencies of Grey Gables. There would have to be a contract. All of a sudden, if the province awarded 96 beds and we came back with 64 or 32 or whatever, they have to decide whether there is enough allocation in the county. They may not say. They may say, look, we've given out all these beds. We can't give you 96 beds. We don't know. But it goes back to applying for that mortgage. You don't know what to buy until you get the pre-approval. And that's what I say this is, Mr. Ward. This is the pre-approval. This doesn't tie us into any financial in the sense of we're locked into 96 beds. I mean, who would do that, right? But certainly we need to do this now. Work with what we feel is to get those reports coming so we can do the two parallel things at the same time. And certainly we put the application, certainly we get more information, and if there's a change in a month's time and we feel that whatever, then maybe we amend that application. But we got to get this applied for now, just to show that we are in the queue, because remember, there's only so many that they're allocating in the province, and who knows how many's on the stack. And if we end up at the bottom of the stack, say December, and there's all these above, we may miss out. So I don't know. I don't know those answers. I guess the other question is to you, Madam CAO, who is your contact at the province? Who do you talk to? We have tried to set up a meeting with our local MPP. We should work with our local MPP to also ask those questions. I know with with other municipal.
I'm sorry, I accidentally cut you off. I didn't mean to. If you could push your button again.
Just kidding. So, I think we need to, I know we missed the opportunity to meet with our local MPP last Friday. Let's set that up. Let's have that conversation. Let's work in parallels. Let's work together. Let's work and see what that is. And I've always asked this question before, is how come there's a different system for private versus public? How come we don't know the bigger picture, and we don't get those answers. And maybe there's new people in play that can tell us that, because it seemed to be working at two different levels, you know, and not knowing what that is. So anyway, I support this resolution, Mr. Warden.
Verify that. Councillor McLean, I can provide a little bit of clarity. The difference, they track the beds differently between the public and the private sector, because the public beds are essentially without value, right? If we decided that we didn't wish to have the beds anymore, there's a whole process that you go through that we've talked to council about, where you have to provide notification, and then there's a period of time you have to like give them 5 years notice, etc. The private sector can move beds between homes, between operators, and there's a process for that, but within those private sector companies, there's also some value associated with those beds. That's not the case for us, so that's why they're different. We can't transfer our beds to someone, they wouldn't let us, and even if we could, we wouldn't be able to assign a value to those beds. That's where we're different than the private sector.
Okay. Councillor Klumpus.
I'm on. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of council for your very, very thoughtful and informative comments. I really, really appreciate this discussion this morning. And I, too, am very, very much in favor of extending long-term care homes and services for seniors in Grey County. I guess I have a question that has been niggling at me. The province has indicated that they are going to be approving 15,000 more beds over 10 years. I'm just wondering if there is a likelihood, from your experience with the ministry, is there a likelihood that there will be a second intake? And if that second intake would be appropriate to allow us the time to get the financial information that is required to make this decision?
Through you, Mr. Warden, it would be, I think, appropriate to assume that there will be further intakes. The fact that we've waited such a long time for this intake, and we knew that there were a number of companies that were sitting on applications, I think the short window that was provided for this intake is indicative of the fact that they knew that they had a number of applications that were sitting from the previous government, and they were trying to move forward through them. And that there would be other intakes in the future. When you look at this application, they are looking for projects that can move forward by 2023. So even that, you know, we would have to have some discussion with the province about you know, just the timeline of a project. So, you know, to assume that somebody's ready to go in 30 and have something up and going in 36 months suggests that you've already done a tremendous amount of work to be prepared to put a shovel in the ground.
Okay, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I was hoping this wouldn't be a discussion about private versus public, but it has been brought to the table. I think there's room in our county for both services. One thing I did look up, though, at the average throughout Ontario, the average public-operated long-term care facility, you get an extra 25 minutes of care per day if you're in a municipally operated compared to a private. So if you've got a lot of chronic needs, I think that 25 minutes is probably very important to you. Thank you.
Councillor Soever.
Just briefly answering Councillor McQueen's question, we're up over $1 million for the county now and 1.1 for the town. And this is just supplementary assessment. This is just moving things into the proper assessment class and catching up. So that number is surprisingly close to the 1.2 too that was quoted earlier.
Councillor Body.
Just a really quick note to answer Councillor McQueen on the east side. There's 51 new beds going into Meaford and 77 rebuilt. So there are some new ones that are going into that corner of the county. Thanks.
Okay, I feel like we have had, I don't want to stifle discussion, it's an important issue, but I feel like we've had our discussion and we're ready to put the question to a vote. So that said, I'm going to call the question. All those,
No, we've asked Councillor.
oh, sorry, there's been a
He's asked for
request that it be recorded. My apologies. Okay.
So we are voting on the deferral of the original motion. Councillor Mackey.
No.
Councillor Mackey votes no. Councillor Gamble.
No.
Councillor Gamble votes no. Councillor Burley.
For.
Councillor Burley votes in favor. Oops. Councillor Carlton.
No.
Okay, Councillor Carlton votes against. Councillor McQueen.
No.
Councillor McQueen votes against. Councillor Desai.
Opposed?
Councillor Desai votes against. Councillor Patterson.
In favor.
Councillor Patterson is in favor. Warden Hicks.
Yay.
Warden Hicks votes in favor. Councillor Klumpus.
Yes.
Councillor Klumpus votes in favor. Councillor Keaveney.
No.
Councillor Keaveney votes against. Councillor Body.
Yes.
Councillor Body votes in favor. Councillor O'Leary.
In favor.
Councillor O'Leary votes in favor. Councillor Woodbury.
Opposed.
Councillor Woodbury votes against. Councillor Millen.
Yes.
Councillor Millen votes in favor. Councillor Soever.
Opposed?
Councillor Soever votes against. Councillor Bartnicki.
Opposed?
Councillor Bartnicki votes opposed. Councillor Robinson.
No.
Councillor Robinson votes opposed. Councillor Hutchinson.
No.
Councillor Hutchison votes opposed. The motion is lost 37 to 53. So now we need to vote on the original motion because it's been pulled.
Perfect, okay. All right, so we are now moving to vote on the, my apologies, I didn't,
Oh, I'm
got my sound. Councillor Burrow?
Mr. Warden, do we still expect to see staff reports coming back on this issue?
Definitely.
The motion doesn't really suggest that, so I'm just asking, are we to assume that, or will that come forward?
Well, I guess what my interpretation would be is that the motion was to defer so that we could receive the staff report. That motion is lost. So I'm going to take from that a staff report isn't required. Councillor Burley.
Can I ask then that we do receive staff reports as soon as possible?
Okay, so we need to vote first of all on the main motion, correct? To receive the minutes. I suppose you could bring a motion for a staff report, and if it were seconded, we can certainly vote on that. Kim has some comments.
Given the interest that I'm hearing from everyone around the table about putting together the application, and given the point that I made earlier that a substantial amount of the information that would be required to go into the application would be the same information that would go into a staff report, I would suggest to council that our efforts as staff might be best put into developing an application in order to meet the timeline that's in front of us. And similar to what was done with the earlier Rockwood Terrace application, we'll make sure that that comes back through so people have an opportunity to review that information. and the implications of the application.
Councillor Burley.
Can I at least ask that a staff report come back to long-term care committee?
I think that certainly the long-term care committee can ask that a report come back to it, yes. Councillor Mackey.
Thank you, Warden. The Long-Term Care Committee has previously asked for staff reports, so we're still awaiting them. The last time we asked, it was going to be sometime in October, but I don't think that, well, it didn't come in October. So, but the report has been asked for by the Long-Term Care Committee. So it should be coming forthwith.
To be clear, there's a significant difference between a 32-bed ask and a 96-bed ask. So now that we're clear that we're proceeding with a 96-bed ask, that is the report that we will provide to you as quickly as we can.
Yes. Councillor McQueen.
Well, this is sort of point of order. From the motion that was passed, and I was told that if you're going to change the motion, you've got to make a notice of motion to change that motion. But the motion that was there was that we would apply for a minimum of 90 additional long-term beds. So we put the word minimum. The committee recommended 96. We see that has been approved. And that the committee of management would determine the optimal efficiency, financial impact, and equity of the allocation of these beds should they be approved. So I see that I see that it's saying, well, maybe we should wait to see if we get approved. But I do agree, Mr. Warden, that we should be doing it simultaneously, doing some work. Because if it comes back and we don't get 96 beds, we don't want to go to the part of spending hours and hours and hours if it comes back from the province and says, no, we're only going to give you 32. We don't know what that is. But certainly doing a preliminary idea, I think, or if we're going for a full report, well, somehow we've got to amend this motion to state that. I'm not opposed to that, but I think to the motion that's on the books, as I've been told in the past, you've got to stick to the motion that's on the books. And I don't know procedurally how, to you, Madam Clerk, how do we change that direction? How do we bring that forward if we have a motion on the books? Do we have to go through that notice of motion and or can the committee, I mean, the committee of management does have a certain power to ask, to certainly, I don't see a problem with doing that, but I'm just looking for procedural, just to make sure we get it right.
One of the challenges that we faced was that the language in the original motion did not take into account the fact that the province might award beds outside of a formal application process. So what has since that original resolution was passed, we've received 28 new beds. That resolution didn't foresee that being a possibility. So the idea that we were going to apply for beds, potentially for both facilities, and then we would come back to the committee of management and say, you know, Rockwood Terrace would benefit from this and Grey Gables would benefit from that. I think that's what we foresaw going through an application process to do, and that's simply not what's happened. So now we have 28 new beds for Rockwood Terrace. We're moving forward with a project for Rockwood Terrace based on that number. And so this idea of the committee of management needing to determine how best to award or allocate, I guess, those beds is not really a question anymore, because we're not thinking about changing the allocation at Rockwood Terrace anymore. That project has been confirmed by the project. Any additional beds that we receive would now be focused on Grey Gables.
Point of order, Madam CEO, to you, Mr. CEO, the motion that
If you could push your...
it's in there. It said we would, I don't have that motion in front of me. I know Tara shared it with me a few weeks back when I was looking at that notice of motion, but and that other, maybe it's CW 26, but it says that we, however it's worded, and I just don't have it in front of me, but it says that we are going to rescind that motion, and furthermore, we will apply for the 28 beds for Rockwood Terrace. That's in that motion. So the 28 beds was in that, I don't know if you're able to pull it up, but it's in that motion that we rescinded that motion to keep Grey Gables. And it says furthermore that we will apply for 28 more beds for Rockwood Terrace. So we already addressed that 28 in that motion. This was an additional 90, because I remember speaking to this, because the idea with the management committee, they would look at the full complement of Grey County. Maybe Lee Manor would want a few more beds. I don't know, but it was there put that way in the sense of a minimum. So if you can pull, I don't know, through the clerk's department, if you can pull that other motion up, but it does speak that we would apply for 28 beds for the Rockwood Terrace on that original motion, that we were rescinding that motion of Grey Gables to be sold off.
Staff are looking for the original motion. If you could push your microphone, please.
Yeah, it was forwarded from Tara a few weeks back, but it does say in that motion. It could be CW 26.
What I think we can do, in the interest of time, Councillor McQueen, what we could do, we have to vote on the minutes, the full minutes, and if approved, those minutes contain a motion from the Committee of Management about applying for 96 beds for Grey Gables, okay? Go ahead.
We've pulled that to be voted on separately.
We have, and that's what we're
Yes.
moving on next. Right? So we're gonna vote on that next. Staff can take the time, perhaps after we have a break, to come up with the original motion about the minimum of 90 beds. So I'm gonna suggest that we direct our attention to the motion itself with respect to, so CM 51-19 on page 16 of your package. The motion of the Committee of Management that you see there is what we're voting on now. Everyone understood? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Could that motion or the recommendation from the Long-Term Care Committee of Management be read, please, before we vote on it?
Madam Clerk.
Whereas the Committee of the Whole passed Resolution CW 2719 endorsed by County Council February 14th, 2019, directing staff to apply for a minimum of 90 additional long-term care beds, and that Committee of Management would determine the optimal efficiency, financial impact, and equity of the allocation of these beds should they be approved. Now therefore be it resolved that the Committee of Management recommends that direction be provided to staff further to Resolution CW 2719, and that an application be made to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care for 96 long-term care beds.
Okay, we're all clear? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. All right, so now we're on the full package, right? Because we did pull that separate.
Yes.
Okay, so we're voting on we're back to
The rest of the minutes.
item 5, yeah, item 5D, which is 5C, excuse me, a long-term care Committee of Management minutes dated October 8th, the rest of it. Okay? No discussion. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. And I'm going to suggest that we next move on the Long-Term Care Committee of Management a closed meeting minutes dated October 8th. That's item 5D. I'm looking for a mover, please. Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Bartnicki. Is there any discussion on that? If there is, we'd have to go into a closed session. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. I'm going to suggest that we take a short break to allow staff to bring up that original motion about the minimum 90 beds when we come back, okay? Short break.
So I'm just providing clarification on the question asked by Councillor McQueen earlier. So at the January 24th Committee of the Whole minutes, the resolution to apply for a minimum of 90 additional beds, long-term care beds, was passed, and that was passed at the council session on February 14th. What was changed on February 14th, not that motion, but the motion originally on the floor to rescind resolution CC 3117 regarding the sale of Grey Gables, and that we amend the application to the Ministry of Long-Term Care for 128 beds for Rockwood Terrace. So they are two distinct resolutions.
In that motion, at that time, we did ask for 28 more beds for the 100 beds, so that's why it was 128. So my point was at that time in January, ratified in February, the 28 beds were asked for at that time. Is that not how I read that? Because then they got approved.
Sorry, so just to be clear, one motion came before the other. So there was the motion to apply for a minimum of 90 beds, and then I would offer that there was a clarification that with respect to Rockwood, we were clarifying with the ministry that we were actually now amending our application to apply for 128 beds for Rockwood.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, but it's going back to the committee of the whole meeting, I think it was February 24th or whatever it was. The motion before the 90 beds was to rescind the motion of whatever it was to dispose of Grey Gables. But in that same motion was then to apply, I guess, the 128 beds for Rockwood. But that was separate to the 90. And that was my point, is the 90 was separate to the 128. And that's how, and I didn't realize that till Tara sent that out to me a few weeks back, that there were two separate motions. And it's too bad you couldn't pull it up, but I know that was, because then I thought, oh, then we applied for the 28 rebuild along with the 100 of Rockwood on that motion, and the 90 was over above those 28. I don't know if you can pull those up, those motions, but I know in the committee of the whole meeting that's, and you're saying.
Sorry, point of order. I don't understand what this has to do with them. I'm losing it.
You're quite right. We've gone well beyond where we should be going with this. The point is frankly moot, because we do have a motion that was recently approved to apply for 96 beds for Grey Gables.
Well, the point of order, Mr. Warren, was.
Could you push your button, please?
But the 90 included the 28, but the 28 was already in the other motion, so the 90 was new. That was the point.
Okay, I'm going to move on. So we are on item 6 now, bylaws, and we're looking at a bylaw to appoint the auditor. Item 6, I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Let's go with that. Struggling for Hutchison, I apologize. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Okay. My worship? Okay, item 7, good news and celebrations. God knows we need some good news right about now. Councillor Mackey.
Yes, I'm pleased to report some good news, Mr. Warden. On November 28th, at the Chatsworth Legion, a local, well, he's lived here most of his life, Ken Reimer has been nominated for the Ombudsman Accommodation, so the Veterans Ombudsman Accommodation Award, and he is going to be receiving that. Mr. Reimer was a World War II pilot, started in 1943 in the Air Force, was overseas in England and Germany, and was discharged in 1946. Had a business in Owen Sound, lived in Meaford, and was a member for 70 years with the Legion. 12 of those years he served as the Veteran Services Officer, and it's nice to know that he's going to be awarded for that service. So everyone is invited to the Chatsworth Legion on the 28th at 12 o'clock. And just a question, Mr. Warden, does the county provide any certificates of appreciation or the such?
There are requests made, and yes, we do provide it when they're requested.
Who would the request be made to?
I would probably put that request through Penny. Councillor Soever.
Yes, on October 20th, 2019, the Thornbury-Clarksburg Rotary hosted this year's Run Blue Mountains in partnership with Events for Life and the Hope Haven Therapeutic Riding Center. There were 337 runners, and Hope Haven team raised $3,900 for their activities at the riding center, and the Events for Life team raised $1,700. So that was an excellent turnout, and it was a great event for the community. Also on October 17th, we had our meeting of our Joint Municipal Physician Recruitment and Retention Committee. I want to thank Barb and Paul for attending as guests. The good news is the committee is brand new. It's up and running, and it's trying to recruit doctors to the South Georgian Bay area. Currently, we're recruiting municipal members from the area to join us. And although the committee is brand new, they've already had some success, and that's why it's in the good news and celebrations, in getting interest from a doctor in working in the Bumstead Clinic in Meaford. So this committee is brand new, but it's already had some success. So I just wanted to let people know that we're up and running.
Thank you. Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And I just wanted to invite everyone to our Meaford Dragons event, which is happening on October the 30th at Meaford Hall at 7:30 p.m. It's a Chamber of Commerce event, and like the TV show Dragon's Den, it's 5 contestants and 5 dragons. The host this year is comedian Andrew Chapman of international fame, and tickets are $30, and $5 of your $30 goes into a pot for the Audience Choice Award, so everybody in the audience gets to be a dragon too. It's a lot of fun, and I hope we'll all see you we'll see you all in Meaford on October the 30th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keaveney. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I was at I attended the Grey County Federation of Agriculture's annual meeting, I think about a week and a half ago, and the county was thanked publicly for their efforts to reduce the ag tax rate. So it's nice to get acknowledgement in that respect.
Councillor McQueen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden. I should have brought this forward a little while back, but there are a few new commissioners on the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and Duncan McKinley is back on as the public at large for County of Grey, and myself is a municipal representative from the County of Grey. There's still lots of appointments that need to happen. Hopefully they're going to be done by November, or we won't have a quorum, so there's a bit of a urgency on that part. Also, the office has moved from Thornbury to somewhere here in Owen Sound. The M&R office, do you know, it's somewhere at the M&R office. Maybe I'm looking at Mr. Body. They're sharing space now, so those that wish to address Niagara Escarpment Commission permits, you need to go to the Owen Sound. I'm sure it'll be on the website, and that was their announcement at their October meeting. As we know that from the tourism side, the tourism, is it TIAO, is having their conference this next week at the Blue Mountains. And I know I'm attending on behalf of the municipality of Grey Highlands, but certainly I know we're big on Grey County tourism here. So, Mr. Ward, I'm presuming you're bringing greetings, or you better be. Yes, because you got to represent us greatly, right? So that's coming up. Certainly at the Grey Bruce Farmers meeting last week, as we know, the Ag Office, Ray Robertson was here just a few minutes ago. Again, a big thank you for the increase from Grey County. It went from, and Randy, from 25 to 35,000, supporting that location there at the bottom of Grey Gables. So again, thank you. Again, they wanted me to pass that on. Again, a big thank you on that, because there's I think over 300 and some meetings in that Ag Office room, the boardroom, a year. So there's a lot of the commodity groups, agricultural groups and that. Plus they have about 22 educational days, different sessions on learning different aspects of agriculture. And it was the Grey Bruce Health Services that I was stumbling over there a few minutes ago. They had their recognition for the volunteer recognition there last Thursday, I think it was, in the Chimplex. And they talked about how close they are for the new hospital, and so they've sort of tweaked the final, I guess, what do you call it, the document that's going to go to tender. And so that's just getting the final approvals from the province. And again, they're looking at possibly tendering in the new year or sometime in that first 6 months of 2020, which will be great news of that next step moving forward to that hospital. So we're this close, Mr. Warden, and I know it's been a long time. I know with the county, we certainly have allocated our amount that we have sitting there that we've raised. It was $1 million less the value of the property, so there certainly will be probably a new campaign moving that will, because as the province lays out that I think the interior stuff has to be raised from the community or however that money that's raised to do the bids and all that kind of stuff. So there may be a new format there. So again, that's great news for Grey County and Markdale for that new hospital. So it's coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bartnicki.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'm really happy to report that the town of Blue Mountains did make a declaration of climate change emergency. Our mayor made that declaration on Monday night, and we are joining several other municipalities in Grey in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I want to ensure that everybody knows that within this past week, we've had 2 volunteer appreciations for 2 of our agricultural societies, for the Durham District Agricultural Society and also the Neustadt Normanby Carrick Agricultural Society held events to celebrate the volunteers for those fall fairs. Both fairs were very successful, but as we all know, our fairs and the success of the fairs are driven by our volunteers, and certainly the volunteers are the heart of local communities, and I needed to ensure that that was on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I think it was Tuesday night, the Grey County Farm Safety invited a number of the mayors down to the AGM, and we had a presentation from Al Leach, who is with the Children's Safety Village. So Al attended county council last term, and it was just a vision that they had at the time, but they've been able to turn that vision into an actual Children's Safety Village. So members of they've had their first classes there, so it's open to all the kids, kindergarten to grade 1 in Bluewater, and I think they're extending it down into Huron and Perth also. But Hanover Fire and Hanover Police were there as part of the first couple of classes, and I think it'd be worthwhile having Mr. Leach come and present to this county council, because it was really interesting, the work. Grey County did supply $5,000, I think, the last term of council, and we've got a road named after. It's a Grey County line, it's called, so that he proudly displayed that sign for us. He did indicate that Bruce County has supported them a lot more than what Grey has, so it's maybe a challenge for us. But anyways, it would be, it's certainly keeping our children safe is important to all of us, and it's a really good program that they're offering. And it's done in conjunction with Saugeen Valley, who has offered up their previous admin center. So just wanted to let everyone know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackey. I think that's it. I'm now looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Mackey, seconded by Councillor Bartnicki. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. So we'll turn over now to